A very good afternoon to all of you. I welcome you all to season 2 of ICF Sunday webinar series, in which today we are starting season 2 of the interview series also. Earlier we had our interview series on Saturdays, but this time we have shifted the interviews to Sunday evenings. And it's a different series by the name Take Wing. May your editing business flourish. Ganesh will be interviewing editors, freelance editors, in-house editors as
Or
part of the
interviewing,
series.
interrogating.
That's up to you what you do.
That's ominous, huh?
Very much so.
And today he will be talking to Chitralekha Manohar and to Ujjwala Vaidya. Ujjwala Vaidya has been in this field since 2006, and currently she is senior manager copy editing with Newgen, and she takes care of QC, recruitment, team building, and training. Somebody's microphone. I think all the participants can please mute themselves. Chitralekha Manohar has been in the field of copy editing since 2010, and in 2016 she turned a freelancer, and now she handles a team. So we will know more about both sides of the equation, how it is for a in-house editor to build a team, what are the challenges, and how it is for a freelance editor. So over to you, Ganesh.
Thanks, Vivek. You want to say a couple of lines about them, their profile?
I have already given a brief intro.
Done.
So, I'm sorry I forgot you. So maybe you were indirectly trying to.
No. I was just
in that direction. So
not
Ganesh,
at all. So let's dive in.
Yeah, Ganesh is from.
But I think it is fair that we hear about Ganesh as well. So
Ganesh is from the field of advertising. He's a writer, he's an editor, he's a personal branding consultant, he's a published author, and a lot more. And he will be interrogating or interviewing our guests, Ujjwala and Chitralekha Manohar. So over to you, Ganesh.
Yeah, thanks, Vivek. Wonderful. So welcome to all of you. Hi, and hi Chitra again, and hi Ujjwala.
Hi.
Lovely to be here. Lovely. I hope it's not a sleepy Sunday afternoon where we pull you from your beds.
Unfortunately, it's a working Sunday for me.
Okay. Interesting. But we'll give you a lot of food for thought. Like Vivek said, we're kickstarting a series today, series of conversations with the focus being on growing the editorial business. Because a lot of us in the community are either freelancers today, that is independent editors, or they want to be one pretty soon, even if they're employed somewhere, or some of us even run boutique agencies. And therefore the pressures, the challenges, the mindsets, the decisions, the journeys of running your independent setup is they're unique. They're specific. So we thought, why not spotlight those in this series of conversations? So each month we hope to have one such conversation at least, possibly two. And each time we will be in conversation with a freelance editor, an independent editor, or someone who runs an agency. So we have two such people with us now, Chitra and Ujjwala. We're going to have this for about an hour, I think 4 to 5. And we'll try to slot in the last few minutes for questions. Vivek, they can send in questions, I assume. Can they send it on the chat?
Yeah, they can send their questions in the chat box and we will take them at the end.
Wonderful. So we'll try to time this accordingly and wrap this up by 5:15, right? Okay. I'll start with you, Ujjwala. So when we spoke the first time, on the phone last week, you mentioned that you realized editing was your calling, somewhere mid-career. Correct? Yes, you've not been a career editor, right? You've not been an editor all along.
No.
So, the question is, can you tell us what made this realization happen? Was it gradual? What led to it? And I find this word calling very interesting because I bond very strongly with it. I think calling goes beyond interest, beyond profession. It's something far deeper than that. So tell us what led to it, and also tell us what is the calling state of mind. What does it mean to have a calling?
Okay. Good afternoon everyone, and thanks for being here on a Sunday afternoon. And it's nice to see so many people interested in this field because, my dad was a doctor. Okay, and it was all along my passion to do medicine. But due to some circumstances, I ended up doing engineering. So,
Oh,
two,
Mm.
so far apart these two are. But yeah, I was quite happy in my engineering, and I did, a couple of stints in a high tech CNC machine manufacturing company, and then I was into education with NIIT.
oh,
Then I joined software industry where I was into the project management role. Never in my wildest dream, I thought I end up as a copy editor. But to be very honest, I didn't even know what copy editing was, till I joined Newgen. So it was,
mm,
I was just saying it's an editorial thing where you correct grammar and stuff like that. But no. So when about say 15 to 16 years down the line in my career, I had to take a maternity break for the birth of my second child, and then by the time I was out of it, I had kind of, I did not want to do IT anymore. And then I was looking for, but then I had to get back to work. I couldn't sit at home. And I was looking for something which is close to my house, within
yeah.
kilometers where if needed, I can, come back and, tend to children and stuff like that. And then I saw an ad in the paper which had, which had a crossword puzzle. And I love reading, for me, reading is like, it's the medicine for everything. So then it said if you can, and crosswords are my passion. So it said if you can solve this crossword puzzle, walk in for a interview, for a walk-in interview. And this place was around 2 kilometers away. So I finished. I said, wow, something is my passion, and somebody's going to pay me for it. So it was great. So I went, and that's how it started. And that's when I even learned what copy editing was.
Okay.
So, that's, rest, as they say, the cliche, it was this history kind of. But then the thing is, it's just that it's one of my favorite pastimes to read. And this is also, giving me food for the brain and possibly even paying me as well. So I've enjoyed every minute of this journey. I cannot say there's been 1 minute of boredom because so much I read, so much because I love. So that's why I'm saying it's my calling, and I don't think I'll think of anything else from here. It has to, whatever it is, it has to be, with the written word. So that's where I stand right now. And yeah, like I said, it's been a wonderful journey, and I'm happy to be here right now. So
For how long have you been an editor now?
for the past 15 years.
15 years, right? Okay. How has the profession, how has this pulled you deeper into it? Have you fallen in love with editing along the way? I'm assuming you have.
Yes.
What are some of the nuances of editing that you discovered in your journey? Editing is not just about red slashing, about correcting, right? What is the deeper purpose to editing?
See, when I'm reading something, I try to put myself in the author's place, and most of the books that I do are academic books and scholarly books, and these are sometimes, the authors have possibly put, let's say, 10 years, 15 years of their life into writing this. So when I'm very sensitive to the fact that when I'm trying to do some change or some correction, it is that person's it's work, and I have no right to go and make any corrections without telling the author. So that is one thing that I place myself in the author's place. And how would I like it if someone tore my work apart? Kind of. So that has given me a lot of. And what makes me very what we actually see in books these days, let's say Harry Potter or whatever book, it was not in this shape when it came, and people like you and me have done it so beautiful.
Right.
We are giving so much polish to this written word, and that is what makes me, feel that I'm contributing to this, to all the, people who love reading. We are contributing, and we should feel proud of it.
Lovely.
That is my.
Right. Chitra, how has it been for you? How did you come into this line? Quickly retrace the steps, please.
Retrace the steps. I'm going to sort of try to keep it a little bit shorter. I started freelance editing around 2014. I started off with fiction editing because, like Ujjwala, I love reading. So I thought, fiction was the way to go. But somewhere down the line, I had the opportunity to work with Surit Das, who is probably one of the best social science editors in India right now. And working with him and also a couple of internships made me realize that I have this long-standing love for the social sciences and humanities. And I sort of started specializing more in academic editing and very specifically social science editing. And eventually, at one point, my freelance business got large enough for me to hire more people. There was more work than I could handle personally. So the Clean Copy was set up in 2018, and we've been going strong since then.
Oh, so it's been 2.5 years now, roughly, for the Clean Copy.
Yeah, around that much, yeah. So it's sort of like also echoing a little bit about what Ujjwala said, right? I think for me, editing, like if you've heard of the concept of Ikigai, it is like these multiple factors that are aligning to find
that
your
come
idea.
together, right? It's a perfect
Yeah, that come together for a calling, right? And for me, that's what editing is. I find that I am good at it. I find the work very meaningful, especially academic editing. And it pays a bill. So it's this, it's like if there's a little Venn diagram, it sits exactly in the center. So
correct. So you said you set up, you launched the Clean Copy in 2018.
Yeah.
Was that a conscious decision? Was it always in your mind that I want to set up an agency and I want to have a team with me, or did it happen, coincidentally or along the way?
It happened a little organically. And I think as freelancers, a lot of us run into this barrier of time because, you have only 24 hours in a day.
Right.
And you can probably do good editing only for like 4 hours or 6 hours. It's really hard to push past that limit. And editing itself is not a very high paying industry. It has its range, low to high, but compared to other industries, I wouldn't say that it is extremely well paying if you're an individual working in isolation. So the idea was to build a team of editors who sort of share a similar voice, who share a similar ethics of editing, and to sort of see if we can mobilize that collective effort for everyone's gains.
And has it been a big leap or a short jump for you from going solo to having this team and an agency and a brand?
It's always a struggle to sort of figure out where you end and where the business begins, and you're sort of always juggling hats. So that is a challenge, but I have a great deal of sort of respect and fondness for the team I work with, and it's been a very gratifying experience to have people sort of come along on the journey with you.
Right. And I think you feed off the camaraderie, right? It's always great to have a team and use one another as a sounding board also.
Yeah,
and you don't get the feeling that you're isolated, journeying together.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest problems with the freelancer is that when you stop working, your income stops, right? If you need to take a week off either because you're unwell or some family member needs support, then your income takes a hit. So it's really nice to have a team you can lean on where someone else can sort of pick up the slack for that week, and sort of everyone has like a continuity of income, even though people need to take time off at different points.
Right. Ujjwala, tell us a bit more about Newgen. What are the kinds of clients you have? What niches do you work with mostly, and what kind of editing support do you lend them?
I'll say Newgen started somewhere in, I think, 1996. I joined 10 years later, but they started off as a publishing house and catering to a few customers and stuff. But then over the years they've grown exponentially, and now they have a presence in various publishing services. They have moved into, over the years, the company has forayed into various segments like ebooks, accessibility, audiobooks, and the like. And we are very technology focused, and we built various tools and stuff like that to make work easy for us. And the secret to this lies in the constant client focus.
Right.
Over the years, we also found that, and to cater to our clients abroad, we have set up offices in US, UK, Germany, Netherlands, Malaysia, India. Maybe I've got in, a few places. So the thing is, initially it was a bit different the way we work the model, but then somewhere what happened is we mirrored the client organization. It used to be a copy editor, and it was a kind of individual focused. The person came on the job, the copy editor to learn, and then all learnings, the feedbacks, everything was individual. I mean, the person learned lessons and improved on it and went, and there was nothing that trickled down to the team as such. Then what happened? We built, like I said, we mirrored the client. We had a project management team and we have the the individual teams like the copywriting, the typesetting, these things.
Right.
The face of the to the customer is the project management team.
Mm-hmm.
This is exactly how it is in the publishing end. They have a project, they have an editorial team. So that way it was. These were the sparks for us. The project managers. And then the teams as such, what happened now, we consciously began taking people and training them. So training is a very strong aspect in Newgen, and anyone who has worked in Newgen and has gone know that for life they have been trained. It is kind of so very rigorous. We have a rigorous training session, and the team is very important. We are like home. Each of us is like we're a family member, and people who in Newgen come back and join. It's like Mica for them. If they go back,
right.
So it's a very nice, atmosphere and
nice vibe.
Yeah, it's very good, and the feedback sessions are really such that we exchange all the positive and the negative feedbacks, and that becomes a learning for the entire team.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever there is a kind of a feedback, it always gets interrogated kind of thing. We do a audit of what went wrong, and we go back to the client and tell them that this was what went wrong, and these are our the RCA, the root cause analysis, the corrective action, preventive action. This is what we relay back to them, and that has we have gained a very good impression in the industry as a very professional company. So that happens to be our USP, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And as far as editorial support is concerned, what kind of clients do you mainly work with? Your editorial arm.
We work with humanities, legal, science, and STM books. Lot of everything. I mean, medical books. But I have been all along with the humanities and social sciences. So with humanities, social sciences, books.
Right.
I have not worked with journals. It's always been books. So academic and scholarly books.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the kind of clients. So.
Mm-hmm. So when you work with focus on these niches and this segment, these kind of clients. What are their expectations vis-a-vis an agency like you? And therefore, what are your expectations from an editor that you work with? Do you have a full-time team of editors, and do you work with freelancers? Do you use both?
Yes. My team, we do have in-house editors as well as freelancers, because
you work with freelancers.
The volume of work, doesn't, we can't do without freelancers. So, to the copywriting community out there, all the freelancers, a big thank you, because I think companies like us would not do as well without support from people like you. So that's really a very and in India, it's because of thanks to ICF and the work that Vivek and the others have been doing, it's becoming very people know about what this is, and how what is it is very lucrative if you can put it work. But it also means that as an individual, when you're working, it also becomes a matter of how disciplined you are in the work that you do. That's where things like quality and all come in. That as an individual, yes, there is no micromanagement, because there's no one who's telling you you have to do at this point this work. It is how you manage your work. So what becomes important is we are as good as our our vendors.
Right.
Our quality is as good as the vendor's quality.
Absolutely.
So that is what is the crux actually, because copywriting is the backbone of any publishing. That I would say, without any doubt, I would say that is the backbone, and we have to make it, that much better by being quality conscious and meeting deadlines and things like that.
Right. And ultimately, this is what keeps bringing the clients back, right, and generating word of mouth.
Yes.
And so that leads to business growth.
Yeah. So year on year, it's how, these are metrics that we are measured on the number of negative feedbacks we get or the positive feedbacks we get, or how many times we have slipped schedules. So metrics is that we are measured on. And yes, year on year, our business does depend on how much you are keeping to this and by what margin you are actually, slipping, these things. So these and stuff. We really can't go wrong in that, and we have committed a date to the author. There's no way we can, go back on it.
Right.
So when we work with vendors, and that's why we keep stressing on deadlines and quality. So you cannot compromise one for the other. No? It has to be both, and how you balance is it should be on your work ethics and things like that. And when we get a good feedback from the authors and the publishing houses, there's all a feather in our cap.
What are some of the key aspects of quality control that you look at? So in the editorial process, and therefore your expectation from an editor. Can you mention some specific parameters that you look at?
Yeah, see, one is, everyone should, I think every copywriter should be publisher agnostic. In the sense, if I say I'm doing for one particular publisher and I know that style, or if I'm doing Chicago Manual and I know Chicago Manual, this is not, you cannot be fixed to one or I don't know about freelancers, but at least in our this one today, a copywriter, if she works on a particular publisher, so we have, at least where I'm working, at least about 4 to 5 accounts I'm handling, and all style manuals are different. Agreed that they probably go back to Chicago Manual or New Hearts, but basically all publishers have their own house styles.
Yeah.
So if somebody is working on this, tomorrow if I give her another book, she can't say I can't work because I do not know this style. You
right.
should get able to read and their house styles and be able to implement, and within time, whatever, you should have that discipline to go through it, understand the style, apply that house style. Because it's not about grammar, it's also about house styles. So that is important, that you adapt to different styles quickly, and so that, and you become productive for another publisher ASAP. So
correct.
That is important.
Right. Okay. Chitra, how is it for you? You work with a lot of universities, independent researchers, research organizations, right? So what are their expectations in terms of quality, and what are some specs that they give you which you pass on or you use with your team?
Yeah. So Ujwala earlier spoke about putting yourself in the author's place, right?
Yeah.
I would take the opposite point of view, where I believe that the editor is advocate for the reader. Because very often the author has been so immersed in their research, they don't necessarily, they're not very good at communicating their findings in a way that is understandable to their audience. And I honestly believe that academic writing right now is has constructed this giant wall between itself and the lay reader. And I think it's part of the editor's role to sort of chip away at that wall, to sort of help make this information more accessible to whoever might want to consume it. Not necessarily academic peers, but also other people.
Right.
So I think for me at the Clean Copy personally, and also of my editors, I expect them to sort of really be able to get to the heart of what this author was trying to say, to figure out what their argument is, what their hypothesis is, what is the evidence they're using to make this argument, and then figure out how to communicate this information as clearly and concisely as possible so that sort of the point comes across. Right. So we do tend to be a little brutal with our authors. We do tend to have a slightly high intervention style. Sometimes there's like a wall of comment after comment after comment saying change this, changes.
Right.
I think after we go through that process, at the end, we do have a much better final product. And it is always very gratifying when someone comes back and says like, hey, thank you, my paper got published, it was rejected earlier. Or someone who says like, hey, my grant was like approved. And that's a great feeling, because that very often the author has a great idea, they have great research, but they do not necessarily have the language skills, or like they have been taught that they need to use jargon to like convey their information, which is not necessary. So if you can sort of simplify that part of the process for them, and you become sort of help them in their journey towards communicating this excellent research they've done, like I think that's what the editor's role is. And sort of, I really like working with people who sort of have the same values, who really believe about the role of academic writing in the world, the role of academia in the world, and who are sort of really committed to sort of helping the social sciences sort of nudge the world in a nice way. Yeah.
That's a great point you said. I think all of them have a lot of research, a lot of knowledge, and lots to really communicate. And it either ends up being garbled in the newspaper, garbled in some fashion or the other, or like you said, they put up too many walls between themselves and the reader, right? So in terms of jargon, complicated sentences. So your role is essentially not to lose the meat of the matter, but to let that come shining through.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a fine line between simplicity and nuance, right? You don't want to, in the interest of clarity,
lose the nuance, lose the substance.
Exactly. So it's sort of being able to walk that very fine line.
You mentioned brutal feedback. How do people take that? So brutal as in candid, you mean, or brutal? There's a difference
No, I wouldn't. We're obviously not going to be mean about it and say your paper's rubbish.
I
Please
know.
go away. We're not going
But
to
it's
say
candid.
that. I wouldn't even say candid. I would say that it requires a lot of effort on the part of the author to sort of go through, in a page in a 10-page journal article, there are going to be maybe like 300 comments to sort of go through each of those, implement those changes. It takes a lot of effort, and it takes a certain humility to sort of be vulnerable and open
open to that. Yeah.
To that kind of change. So I would say it's brutal in that sense, especially if you've been working on this paper for 1 year, 2 years, more than that. And if and then you've put in effort into writing, you've given it to your peers, and then someone else who's not even from your field comes in and says, make all these changes. It is a vulnerable position to put yourself in. So I would say, yeah, it is a little difficult in that sense, but I think there needs to be that trust in that author-editor relationship.
Right.
And if you work together to make the paper or the book, the best form it can be.
Right. Ultimately, it's increasing their chances of getting the paper published quicker, smoother, and having the desired impact on the reader, right?
Yeah,
so I guess
absolutely.
You'll realize that.
Yeah.
Right. Ujjwala, what is the... tell us a little bit about your team. So when you work with freelancers and when you hire editors for your in-house team, what is the selection process? What are your expectations of them? What kind of editors do you want to work with?
Okay. The two things. One is either we take freshers who are good in the basic grammar, and we have a test like that for them as an entry level. There's a test where they have to at least minimal that grammar and whatever the correcting English and all that has to be. They have to clear that. Then they have to write an essay, and it has to be a coherent essay. Where there is, let's say, if there is about 500 words. Say 2-3 paragraphs, and there is a a proper link between the first and the next. That is the first thing. And so if we find they're good, then they join as freshers, and then, as like I said, they go through a training process.
Right.
Sometimes we are in need of people who we need them to be productive right away. So, but having said that, it's not that we do not put them on a live job right away. They get on with a with a peer or a buddy, or a QC or review persons like me will be there hand holding them. It will be a kind of one-on-one training. Their work will be peer reviewed, and it goes hand in hand, and they learn from that. So it keeps going. So once we find that they are confident enough to or confident, or they're doing the work well enough to work independently, then we put them on to a live job. So this somebody with say 2+ years of experience should take around 2 or 3 months to get on to the
a live project.
A live project to get to know the working of Newgen as well as the clients that we are working
yes,
and get onto a live job.
Right.
So even then it is never just we don't leave them that way. It's once the work is done, a QC, it goes through a QC, and then when it comes back, we again help them with the cleanup and stuff like that. So it is a hand-holding process till at least I would say 6 months. First 4 books, 5 books, 6 books, 7 books. Till possibly even the 10th book, we are there with them.
Okay.
But again, over the time, if we find somebody is, it is sometimes your fatigue sets in. Even if it is a very experienced copywriter, sometimes you find that their work is kind of slowing down. They are getting blunt at the edges. So in those cases, we also have something called the remedial. So we just, like I said, it's a family. So we just find out what could be the problem with this. Not giving his or her best, and then we kind of do a remedial, go through, see what are the pain points and what are the strong areas, try to put them up and give them more confidence, and again put them through the same thing, again with a buddy, with a someone who is guiding, then a couple of books, and then we put them back. So that is the process we keep, so that we have a very strong team which keeps we keep each other motivated, and I would like to share that we do have training sessions every week where one copywriter will come and do a live copy editing.
Okay.
So it is for everyone. The entire team will be watching, and they go through it, and just to see there's best practices that people share of what they do well. People have different ways of doing. For me, once I see, I'll do a job study, I'll do a style sheet. There are things that I follow. that works for me. So I could share that. Maybe it works. It might work for somebody else also. So those best practices we share, and so that's what this learning keeps going. We keep churning and putting it back into the team and
Correct.
keep developing
So,
each other's strengths.
so this person who comes and runs the demo, the training, or the copy editing, can that person be from outside Newgen? Do you pick people from the industry and invite them to come, or are they people from your team?
No. Right now, these are only team meetings. So every week we, all the more it's become necessity because of the pandemic, where we don't get to see each other's faces.
Correct.
Initially, it used to be in our premises, office premises. We have an office here at Nilangare, so we used to meet there and we used to have our weekly meetings. But now, because it is
Yes.
people are all at home, it becomes all the more important for us to connect and share our whatever. I mean, it could not even be related to work. Sometimes it's also which is not. So we have some fun sessions. We have got some quizzes, games, and stuff like that. Once in a few weeks we have that, so that we're all connected, and as a team we have that teamwork going. So it's
Right. And it keeps the family vibe intact, I'd assume, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
that's something that I picked up from you. The other thing that I picked up is also and that possibly comes from the family spirit, which is about hand-holding, supporting, and being there for your editors all along. And even if they are senior and if they need some remedial refresher kind of training.
Yes.
What else does it take to build a strong team? Ultimately, what a team delivers is what goes out to your clients, and that's what year after year builds your reputation, right? What else do you think are important to keep a team high performing?
Okay, I would really like to share something here, which is again I would say very close to my heart. The company is very very what do I say, open. It's a very non-hierarchical system where we can just ping anyone, talk to anyone, even to the CEO, to the president. We can just like that address them, go to them with any problem. Okay, so that's why, if I'm not taking too much time, I would just like to relate an incident that happened recently. There was a book that it was done by a very, very experienced copy editor. And it came back from, let's say, the proofs. After the first proofs, the author came back with 4,000 corrections.
Oh.
For a book which is 200 odd proof pages, 4,000 corrections.
Wow.
And that kind of sent everybody in a tizzy. So we all of it had to rush around to see what went wrong, do a root cause analysis and stuff like that. So then I took it to start investigating from the very beginning, from the copy editing portion to the, to all the chapters that I opened and saw. I saw that it was mostly the author had, given a lot of corrections he wanted to do. He wanted to change how the text looked. He wanted to change he wanted to polish it more. I would say it went back to developmental editing. He had but we had also got, from the publisher saying, what is this? I mean, why is the author so upset? Why don't you look at this?
Okay.
We were saying, we said, I said, he's one of the best copy editors we have. So our CEO was on the call and he said, I think this is just an author, he's a whiny author, and he just wants to put us in a spot because he's done a lot of changes. It's like, as a team, we stood behind this copy editor saying that, no, we are not going to apologize.
Right.
Because there were lots of corrections and possibly he had to, the author, I mean, there is something, if he does more than 30% corrections, there is a payment attached to it. So because there's a lot of work going in it. So maybe he wanted to get out of it or something. So he said, we are not apologizing, and let us just do a, proper root cause analysis and give it to them. And I came back and we offered to do a proofreading or whatever, but this is the thing is we are all very stood with that, and the copyright was very, very relieved because otherwise he thought, okay, my God, what am I doing?
Correct. He must have been very jittery, yeah.
His language edit was too good. I went through all his edits. It was all fine. It was only that the author was, kind of, he was putting us on the back foot. So then we were there, we rallied behind him, and it all ended well, kind of. So
super, excellent. Chitra, question for you about niches that you focus on. All right. So, and the kind of organizations that you work with, how did that evolve, and how has that worked for you? Also, how important is it for an independent editor, someone who runs a team, to say no to certain niches and certain clients, as important as it is to say yes to certain others? Can you tell us about that?
To be honest, like, we've been running Clean Copy for about 2.5 years, and I think it's only at this point where I'm actually starting to say no to projects. Because in the beginning, I think it makes sense to be diverse, to sort of you need to make that much of income, to be honest. Like, you don't have the luxury of saying no, even though it would be nice. Like, something that's really way off, very plagiarized, obviously say no to it. But largely, it's important to be diverse. And then after you've been diverse for a while, then you can figure out what your niche is and sort of keep honing that and sort of becoming more and more specific about what you're doing. I think I particularly enjoy working with journals directly, where like journals in India, for example, EPW, or like individual think tanks in India, like Center for Energy, Environment and Water, or Center for Internet and Society, where it's sort of, there's a lot of autonomy to sort of work directly with the author to sort of shape the work that
Okay.
you do. And also, like, I am sort of, I strongly believe in the work they are doing, so that is also quite exciting. So if we were to focus on a niche, that would be the niche that we would focus on, to work with organizations that are doing more and more interesting work, to work with individual academics who are doing more and more
Right.
interesting work. But I would say at this point, we are not very specialized either. Like, yeah, like we are fairly open. We do like a fair bit of textbook content. We write blog posts for like IT companies. It's, I think there is a lot of value to novelty. And I do believe that there is a lot of value to cross pollination of ideas.
Yes, yes,
Because something you learn, like writing copy for a blog post, might strike your idea of like, oh, you know, I could implement like the same sort of idea while editing something else in sociology later. So
Right.
I think specialization is good, but also it's nice to keep it open for a bit.
Right, right. So that also brings in a little bit of variety, right? Keeps the interest levels up.
Yeah, yeah,
Otherwise, you
exactly.
get very monotonous and,
Yeah,
working on, I know. Right.
absolutely.
Mm. So, what are team conversations like? Can you give us an idea of an average day? Pre-COVID, post-COVID doesn't matter. Ultimately, I'm speaking about
Yeah,
team dynamics, the
yeah,
kind of conversations you have, and ultimately what brings you to work every day.
yeah. For us, to be honest, a clean copy, there is no pre-COVID, post-COVID. It's been
I
the
know.
same. The entire team works remotely. We are 6 editors. Everyone works from home. It's been pretty great. We have a WhatsApp group, which is mostly like a troubleshooting group, where someone will be like, "Hey, I'm working for this client. Like, is this the call you would make?" And someone else would reply and have like a little discussion on it. So that's fairly active. Besides that, everyone works more or less autonomously. Um,
With their own set of clients, is it? Direct liaison with.
Oh, no, no. We are all working on joint clients. So we have joint style sheets. There is a fair amount of like feedback. All of that happens. But we don't get together as a team that frequently and have conversations. We work remotely. Like, we have tried in the past working from a co-working office together,
Ah,
but I think it's just maybe personality wise for me, personality wise for the team, you're just working together, and then what, you're working in silence on your laptops. And then it's just
I
like,
know.
what's the point of this? We might
Correct.
as well work from home, save money.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but the average edit, like life for us at team at Clean Copy is that we have like a joint workflow where all the projects that come in are logged onto it. Uh, and then we'll log who's working on what, how much time it takes, and then all of our scheduling happens on that. And it's sort of, I believe in sort of giving editors as much time as possible within reason to sort of work on things so that we can assure our clients the best possible quality. And and everyone also has fairly flexible schedules at Clean Copy. We also allow people sort of like an unlimited time off
Okay.
situation. If someone needs to take a month off, I think that's fine as long as they tell us in advance and I can plan for it accordingly. So not everyone is working every day. So, but it's sort of because our scheduling happens in advance and our clients are very understanding, we have a little bit of freedom to sort of jiggle around our deadlines to sort of, yeah, fit everyone in. So the editing happens, and then there's someone else who reviews it. Every document that we send out is reviewed.
Sure.
Either I review it personally, or there's another senior editor who reviews it. It goes to the clients. Our clients are usually two groups of people. One group of people who have good enough language skills and they need someone to just enhance their writing. in which case we send the documents to them with track changes and queries and stuff, and then they can take it from there. They can implement all the changes, send it out. And some authors need like a little bit of hand holding even after that stage. So they implement the changes and then it comes back to us for a final proof. We do that and then it goes out again and then they send it out to wherever it needs to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So fairly open, informal, you can, it's kind of fluid, right? I can sense some fluidity in your setup, which is, I think, very interesting and I think necessary, I think, right, for an agency.
Yeah, because I think if you're a small agency and also if you
Yes.
are an individual freelancer, I think one of the biggest challenges is fluctuations in supply. Because there are these huge seasonal peaks, right?
Correct.
During September, October, when the academic season starts, or during December, basically loosely mapped to the academic cycle. So it's always like managing that is always tricky. Managing how you sort of bring people on board to sort of deal with the volume of work that comes in at that time, and then when there's a downtime, there's no reason why people shouldn't take it easy. I mean, if you're putting in 50% extra work during the peak
Extra
season,
time and work.
yeah, you might as well take it. Like, this is something I really struggled with at the beginning, whereas just like, why is nothing consistent? Why is this like crazy up and down? And then you just sort of learn to lean into it, and then you have like a team that sort of leans into it, and you figure out how to distribute work
Right.
that is comfortable for everyone, and then it works out a little easier.
Nice, very nice. So this peak and trough thing allows me to segue back to Ujjwala. Ujjwala, I'd imagine Newgen being more established and being in the market, having been in the market for longer, may not have this peak and trough scenario, or does it? And linked to that, tell us about how you develop business, how you go out there as in Newgen, and how do clients come to you? Can you give us some sense of that also?
One is I really have not been into the business development side of it, but yeah, like I said already, there's a lot of our quality and word of mouth, and because we've been here since 2016, it's we have made a name in all the parts of the world. We've got our clients everywhere, and because of that, because of the client requirement, we even set up offices across the world, like I said, and repeat customers. We have got a lot of same authors coming back again and again.
Right.
So that way, and like you said, no, we at least for us, it's always work is always there. At least the 3-4 accounts that I'm handling, we round the year we have work. So
okay.
maybe in the beginning of Jan or something, but otherwise the rest of the 11 months it's all full. So we don't have any. I would say, like you said, like Chitra said, she gives off 1 month for her.
That will be unimaginable at your place.
I can't imagine taking 1 month off, but yeah, I mean, if I can maybe plan it well ahead of time, maybe a couple of months ahead of time, and then everything is put in place, then maybe I can take. But otherwise, it's maybe a couple of days here, there. That's about it. So it's, but it's good. Business keeps happening, so the work is always there. So that's one thing. I mean, it's always comforting to know that there is work and there is salary coming in.
Correct, of course. Yes.
Yeah.
Tell us specifically about your work with freelancers, and what kind of work do you decide to keep in house? What kind do you farm out? And what are some of your expectations and experiences with freelancers? Where do what are some of the important things that you would focus on? Because it's not an in-house team and you don't have all those luxuries, right? It is someone who's an independent, person outside.
Yeah, so that's a very good question, Ganesh. I really did want to address the larger community here. See, one is, as soon as a manuscript comes, or at least me and another couple of people with me, we are managers. We do a evaluation of the manuscript to see what kind of edit it requires. And yeah, Chitra, as you were saying earlier, the kind of brutal edit, we at least at the accounts that I handle, we do not do invasive editing. Level 2, where we deal with non-native. It already is in some kind of a good shape when it comes to us. Okay, so we do have non-native writers writing this book, so that way we have to do a little bit rephrasing, but not too much, we don't intervene too much in the author's style and voice. Yeah. So once this happens, I decide as to what kind of edit this book requires.
Right.
We have a matrix of the skills versus the copy editor matrix I have with me, my in-house editors, as well as we have a set of freelancers with whom we generally work. Okay, so then based on that, I will decide who can do this book, whether it is a language intensive book or it's a style intensive book.
Okay. Right.
Something has got a lot of notes and references. I would look at someone who's very meticulous with these things.
Right.
Usually, I have found that people who are good at language generally are not very attentive towards these.
Yes.
What you would call as mechanical kind of work. They think it's
correct.
And it is. But then that is needed. The publisher wants you to do that.
True.
It is important. So once we decide whom to give it to, then we have a person who does the kind of scheduling and all that, and there's a time given. We know, let's assume there's a freelancer who says she can only, let's say, 30 pages per day. So that is something we have, the data we have. So 50 pages book, we give that person 10 plus 1, 11, maybe 12 days. So that schedule is given, and once we give that schedule, we actually relay that back to the editor as well as the author as well as the publisher. Now that date becomes sacrosanct. So you should, vendors who are working or freelancers who are working should know that for us it is a 2-line thing. We have to answer the publisher as well as the author if we miss on that date, unless it is something very, very seriously you can't do. Like now, sometime a couple of months back, we have quite a lot of our editors, in-house editors as well as freelancers who tested positive for COVID and could not work. So this is something serious, and we had to really ask for extension of deadlines, and that happened. It was very very seamlessly it happened because also very understanding. India was not great, so that happened. But otherwise, I think people who are working on a book and you have promised a particular date that you give, that becomes very imperative that you stick to those deadlines. But also keeping in mind that quality cannot suffer.
Yeah.
Say that because it all goes based on input that we received from you. If you say you can do only 25 pages, then fine, we give you more time for it. 25 pages it is. So it is there's no force, or we don't force anyone into taking anything. But having it becomes very, very important that you keep to it, because it is very, very, it becomes very embarrassing when we go back and, tell the publisher and so we have to answer both. The authors, usually authors have set aside time for this.
Correct.
They have something, so they would have kept aside to, time to review this book. So when we do not keep up to it, then it becomes very embarrassing when we go and say that, no, we need a couple of days more.
Correct.
Imagine what he will do for his schedule. He probably has an academic schedule. So he has to go back and change.
So there are consequences upstream, if you delay.
Yes, cascading effects. So that is something that is really not where, yes, maybe if it is very serious, we can probably give a day or two, but otherwise deadlines and quality is something to really balance and keep committed. Yes.
Right.
So that is an expectation from my side. Definitely, I expect that.
Absolutely.
When freelancers take up work. So
wonderful, super. Chitra, I want you to tell us a bit more about the initial days of when you were an independent editor. Also, the initial days of Clean Copy. But possibly the very initial days when you were independent, I would imagine that is more important. Did you falter? How did that journey organically map itself out? How did you get your initial few clients, and how did that grow at some point of time into some sort of steady stream? This journey, this hockey shaped stick, jo bolte hain. So this typically happens with all of us independent professionals, right? How did you navigate that? What happened? Just tell us a bit about that.
So I think I started off freelancing the way a lot of people started off freelancing. It's sort of, I wrote to all the publishers. Did something got, okay, anyway. I wrote to a lot of, I started off cold calling people, essentially. I just wrote up emails to every publisher I knew saying that, hey, do you want a freelancer? Do you want a freelancer? Do you want a freelancer? So a lot of the initial work that I did was for companies like Rupa and Jayco, and I think even Westland for a bit. Fiction, some in varying stages between really bad and really good. And the pay rates were probably like 40 rupees a page or something like that. And some of it, so I was lucky in the sense of I really feel like the start of my career was really subsidized by my privilege, by the fact that I was living with my parents, so I didn't have to pay rent. And the fact that I could afford to sort of take on work at really low rates and sort of do that for like a year and a half before
Right.
I actually started making any sort of good money, right? So I started off doing that. And also, but the thing is, that was happening side by side. And I think even at that time, ICF was around, and that's how I got to meet Surit. So my thanks to Vivek for sort of putting this community together. And at that point, Surit had too much work that he could handle, so he was outsourcing work to me. And we were sort of working together as a team to sort of work with his clients. And I think that was my real introduction to what line editing is.
Right.
I mean, there are the terminology is always very up in the air. Do you call it line editing? Do you call it like rewriting? Do you call it like structural editing? Whatever it is, like basically editing to make it good. Like that. That's pretty much the fundamentals of it. And I think I learned a lot from that process of working with him, to seeing his process of how he worked through
Right.
documents. So I think that was what really set me up to be an editor. So it was even after, and I was also lucky in the sense that I was living with my parents and I also had a day job. So I was freelancing side by side.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that went on for 1.5 years at least. So that sort of, so when I started freelancing full time, I really hit the ground running. I already had like a good enough pipeline of clients. I had like a good amount of money coming in. And then so I started Clean Copy in 2018. And even after we started Clean Copy, I would say it took maybe a year and a half for it to make enough money to pay all my bills, so to say. So having that double cushion of living with family and having a day job that wasn't too intensive was really helpful in sort of getting me started. But what's been really interesting to see the giant like leaps in like pricing in the last couple of years. Because I remember even when I was working with Surit in like 2016 or 17, I think even back then he was charging something like 1 rupee a word. And for me at that point, who was getting paid like 40 rupees a page, I was just like, how is this possible? How is this rate even happening in this industry? But it's really interesting, right? Because in the last 5-6 years, I'm realizing like 1 rupee a word is not that unheard of anymore. And it's sort of people are really sort of pushing that ceiling further and further back. And there are clients who are realizing the value that editors can bring to the table beyond just like fixing grammar and style and things like that. So that's been a really exciting process to see both my individual growth in the industry and also to see the growth of the industry itself in the last couple of years.
Yes. Right. So that's an interesting point about how prices can go up and this increasing realization of clients, of authors.
Yeah.
And I'm finding that too in my little tiny corner of the world.
Yeah.
I'm finding that too, that I think more and more there are these conversations about what editing brings to the table and how it really ends up in a more impactful, compelling read for the reader. So the manuscript goes out far more published, a far more polished version. And so I'm seeing a lot of authors talk to me about impact. Right? And I think that's a great thing, because then keeping commercial considerations aside, I think it also does a lot of good for the image of the industry.
Yeah.
And if they link our work with the ultimate impact of that document, be that a research paper or a book.
Yeah.
So yes, I think those conversations I'm hearing too. Thanks a lot. Very nice. Ujjwala, I think we'll have time for just a question or two. That's all. I want to understand how this price thing works for you. Have you seen a similar kind of, connect with the value that you bring in, and roughly what kind of rates are you charging clients? Or how much are they willing to pay you? Give us some ballpark for an agency like yours. Possible?
No. I don't think I would know that.
Confidential, is it?
It's confidential. I wouldn't know, and I get my salary per month, and if I do well, I meet my targets. I get a good hike. I get a promotion. So, so it's that way. It's quite a comfort to know that it's there. So, but yeah, this community of ICF that I'm a part of, and I see a lot of conversations in the WhatsApp groups about rates and all. So
Right.
I think it is it's actually heartening to see that people are first of all valuing their work. People are, when they say that don't settle for less, what is your value, and I see a lot of fun.
Push
I
back.
can't remember names, but yeah, people say that no, don't settle for less, don't then it just becomes a, and what do you say, cheap thing, which is not.
True,
It's
true.
a very, very such a value add we are doing to the written word. So if you're proud of your work, and when I see the conversations that people are looking to charge for premium for the premium work they're doing, it's very heartening. And a group like ICF was very much necessary, I think, in India, because people really didn't know what it was. And yeah, I did hear of some places where they were paying like pittance, like say 10 rupees, 12 rupees per page, which is very, very sad. So it's good that we are all kind of coming on the same page on what should be the rates, and how the industry should go from there. So it's nice to have these conversations around this.
Right. My last question to both of you is, and I'll go with Ujjwala first. Tell us about your best experience with a client, with a project where the work went off wonderfully well, feedback was excellent, and also the exact counterpoint of that, where possibly something did not go right at all. But also how you bounced back. That's something I want to hear, even from that low experience. So one high, one low, and how did you bounce back from the low?
Yeah, so the high, I'll go with the low first. Okay, so author, I don't know, somewhere some authors do feel that if they ever come to know that it is happening in India, some of them are really have a kind of say a bias that maybe we wouldn't do a good job.
Okay.
I feel that we are language wise, grammar wise, we are way better than anyone in the world,
including let me add, a lot of native English speakers.
Exactly. No, that's what I mean. When I say from others out in the world, it is the US and UK, whatever.
True. Yes.
Possibly know their subject, but when it comes to the nuances of
communication,
I think we are way ahead of them. And
yes,
maybe we don't know their slang and stuff like that. But then when it's in academic or scholarly writing, we're really very good at this. And yeah, we've been trained by none other than the British, but we still beat them in a lot of things. So I've seen people where instead of saying yours, they say, they put an apostrophe there.
With an apostrophe.
Yeah, so I know that we are way better there. So there was, this author who, for some reason, he was very, hostile throughout. So and this one, somewhere he couldn't work with, and he was kind of, I think, not very tech savvy. So he didn't know how to work with track changes. So he took the entire text of the, let's say, 400 odd pages, and he pasted it in email.
Okay.
Everything, the entire book, he pasted it in multiple emails, and he said, you work on this now.
My God.
Yeah, that is a review. I mean, you're supposed to have my track changes. You should have seen. You should have, but he put it and then no, this is how I can do, and you go with it. And I was like, I think it was just about 6 months since I joined Newgen, and my reporting manager, she was very sweet about it, and she said, "Come on now, let's see how to." We did a lot of work. We took the help of some pre-editors. We did a document compare and saw where he went. See, we didn't want to go back and say that no, this is not how it works. But we just ultimately he was. I mean, I won't say he was delighted or anything, but he said, "Okay, fine, thanks, good work." That was, I would say, a very bad experience. And another good experience where I would say is, it's quite a lot of times authors have been happy, but there was one particular author. He was a German, but his book was written very well. But in spite of that, he was very happy with all the small changes that I did, and he wanted to mention my name in his acknowledgements, and he also said that. I'm so happy with your work, and please wait for a gift from me in your mailbox. I was very happy, and what he sent a printed copy of his book. So
what copy? A PDF copy of his book?
No, printed copy.
Printed copy of his book. Okay.
So I mean, he thought I'd be very happy. It was nice. It was about German and some kind of music. Or
sweet of him. Yeah.
Very sweet. But I had read too much about it, so I don't think I read. But it was a very sweet gesture that he, thought of mailing it, to me, and it was nice. It was a nice experience.
It's nice to touch and feel the copy, and keep it on your book stand,
Yes, yes.
on your bookshelf. Yes, that's a book I worked on.
Yeah.
Chitra, what about you?
Gosh,
Harrowing stories, huh?
no, I like if you start with a low first, it was something
Yeah.
that happened recently where there was this particular client we were working with. And this particular, it wasn't a horror story as bad as Ujjwala's, but it was one of those situations where the file kept crashing and we had to do, and the structure of the document also changed a lot while we were doing it. So it was supposed to be a training manual, and then it started off one document, it became 4 documents, and then the whole thing had to be re-cross-referenced, renumbered, all of that really crazy work. And we finished the document, and then we shipped it out. And this client was, yeah, I'm just going to take a leap and give it like the freelancers here would associate with it, where after the whole thing was done, we spent about double the number of hours we had budgeted for the project.
Okay.
And then after the whole thing was done, the client came back and said, actually, this exceeded our budget. This is only how much we can pay. And it was 20% lesser. And it was a bit shocking, but it was a learning experience. Freelancers everywhere, please send contracts with the budget before you start working on a project.
Absolutely. Yes.
Like it was people I had worked with before. So based on that trust, we sort of went for the verbal agreement, and then later it sort of came back to sort of hit me in the face.
So you hadn't agreed on a figure earlier. That's what you say.
We had agreed on a per word figure. We hadn't agreed on a total project figure.
Total. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that ended badly, and I can't say we bounced back from that because we did not.
20% less is quite a lot. Yeah.
It is quite a lot.
Yeah.
So that was the worst. But it's also the worst clients who teach you the most. So I think this client single-handedly made the biggest difference to my business practices this year. So thanks to them. Now everyone gets contracts. I have templates for all of that now. The best thing that has happened is, I don't know if it's the best thing, but it's a thing that is sort of most recently in my memory. There was a particular journal article about the salt industry in Manipur during colonial times. And it was sort of a paper where it needed a lot of structural shifting. There was a lot of extra information. So we put in all the comments saying that, please consider moving this section here, removing this section. It's sort of detracting from the argument. And very often, 70% of the time when we put in these sort of comments, authors just ignore it and go like, no, it's fine. The publisher has okayed it. We are just going to go with it. But this particular academic really took our comments to heart, and he sort of, I think he cut the paper by like 30%. The argument was so much better, so much clearer. The whole paper was so much better. So, and then he sent the paper back to us like 2 weeks later saying that, hey, what do you think? And oh my God, it's like, if your house has been really messy and then you clean it and you feel like the satisfaction, like your heart grows like 2 times in size because of how clean everything is.
All the clutter has been taken away, all the fluff is gone.
Yeah. And this was great because I really loved this paper. I didn't know there was like a salt industry in Manipur during colonial times. So just reading about how it evolved was so fascinating. And now this paper actually was really good. And then it sort of went to publication and I felt really happy. There's no like monetary outcome from this experience because I think I had so little faith in this author. I didn't really expect him to make such drastic changes to his paper. Sort of minimum first, because there are a lot of authors who will be like, yes. I think they intend very well, but when they actually have to make the changes, they change a sentence here, a sentence there, and they just go like, it's done. But
give it a cursory glance,
but to actually see someone who sort of took those comments and made something really good was very satisfying.
Yeah, that's a very tacit way of acknowledging the hard work, the effort that you put in.
Exactly. It makes you feel very seen.
Correct. Yes. Lovely. Super. Shall we look at the questions now? I'm going to look at the chat box and see if okay, I'm going to go right up. So first in, first out. So Shurit has sent in something. Asked, would you ask Chitrilekha this question? You said something like, it's hard to work out the line between yourself and your business. How exactly do you understand that line? 1 second, I'm still trying to understand this. Shurit, if you're there, why don't you just unmute yourself?
Ganesh here left, but this is the exact one that he sent. Okay, he's still there.
No, Vivek, Shurit is here.
Okay, okay.
Sorry,
Ah.
I reappeared.
But
I had to go for a while, but I'm back. So basically, early on in the conversation, you were asking Chitralekha about the early days.
yeah.
And in her answer, she said that it's very hard, something like this. It's very hard to work out the line where you end and the business begins, or where the business ends and you begin. Now, that's a very intriguing statement to me because it's something that I've been struggling with for about 19 years now. And I'm not sure there are answers, but I'd like her perspective on
Okay.
how she navigates that line, how she understands that line.
Right. Chitra?
Yeah, I think there are two components to that problem, and I have not managed to, sorry, some crazy sunlight coming in from the window. I haven't managed to entirely solve both problems either, which is it's a constant work in progress. One is that clients come to you expecting you to work on it, and if you tell them your team is going to work on it, some of them go like, "Oh, okay, but we thought you will be working on it." So it's sort of like if your brand is synonymous with your name, then what is the point of having a company, right? You're still running into the same problems. I think communication really helps in that situation. Not everyone is going to be okay with it, but if you tell them that, okay, for your timeline, if you really want this done in this particular period of time, the only way to do it is if two people work on it. Otherwise, this is not going to be right at the quality levels you expect. And some people say yes, some people say no. And based on that answer, you can decide on whether you want to take the client on or not, and sort of make that call. But I think being honest with them instead of trying to sort of either fake your way through it or sort of, make that decision for them and say that no, because they approached me, only I must work on it. It's not necessarily the best way. Often people are open to a conversation. So that's the first problem. The second problem is this is a thing that I think a lot of small business owners face, where it's about working in the business and on the business. It's sort of like you are both editor and business owner, right? So how much of time do you spend marketing? How much of time do you spend like chasing leads? How much of time do you spend improving processes versus how much of time do you actually spend editing? And that balancing act is really difficult, and it's something that I still sort of struggle with. Yeah, delegating some of the work has helped. For example, Daita, I don't know, she's still on the call, but she handles all the recruitment part of the stuff in our business, which has been very helpful. I have someone else who works on social media. So even if you can't delegate mission critical tasks like actually reviewing everything because your name is going out on it, at least you can delegate the smaller tasks like updating the workflow or sort of updating social media. So that has been helpful, but I won't say I've solved this problem. It's something I deal with constantly.
Yeah, so I'm actually very interested in the line between the natural person and the artificial person.
Mm-hmm.
Shurit Das, the human being, Shurit Das, the business owner or the editor, Chitralekha Manohar, and the director of Clean Copy or owner of Clean Copy. What do you do on Saturdays? When do you decide that you'll take off a particular Monday? Where do you draw the line? This is a real situation.
Yeah.
Friday evening, there was this person in Frankfurt. He logged on at noon, 6 p.m. my time, something like that. And I was expecting the conversation to last 20 minutes. It lasted 2 hours and 55 minutes. And he sent me a proposal, a request for a proposal that would, on a project that would take 18 months. Okay. So it's potentially life-changing, business-changing, all of that. It also weekend destroying. If I had been working through the weekend to respond to the proposal, I decided not to. I decided to preserve my weekend because I don't know if this project is going to take off, but I do know that the weekend is going to be destroyed.
Yes.
I optimize the weekend ahead of the future, but I can tell you with 100% certainty, I wouldn't have done this 3 years back. I worked through the weekend and the night to get in. I would have destroyed my weekend. I would destroy my schedule to do that. How does one draw the line? When does one begin to realize that these lines should not be stepped beyond.
Yeah.
How did you work it all out?
Yeah. I think,
This is a constant struggle for me.
yeah. Like, I think this problem of work-life balance, or however you call it, is sort of something that plagues freelancers everywhere, right? And I won't say I have a solution to this problem. I think I regularly get burnt out at least once a year. That seems to be a pattern. But I think what I've realized is, like, if you've heard that story about, like, there's a jar, and then if you put the sand in it first, and then you put the rocks won't fit in. So you put the rocks in, and then you put the sand, and then you put the water, and then everything fits inside the jar. And I think this idea of work-life balance is a little bit of a misnomer. I think instead, at least for me, the way it works is work just tends to expand to take in whatever time you give it.
Whatever time you have.
Yeah. So you put in the rocks first. You schedule your time for health. You schedule your time for family. You schedule your time for friends. You schedule your off time. You put in the rocks into the jug first. And then you figure out the work that will fit in the remaining time. That seems to be the only way to do it. I won't say I'm an expert at this. I constantly struggle with this, but I think this is possibly a mindset that could help me work around it. So the way you said, Sarit, I think the way is to you create that policy for yourself saying, I don't work on weekends, and then you stick to it no matter the cost. And that seems to be the only way to do it, because there's always something urgent and there's always like something important that needs to be done.
Right. I'll add my tuppence to this, Shurit. So I have a fairly fluid working system, structure, schedule, blah, blah. It's not very compartmentalized, but like I said, it's fairly structured yet fluid. Yeah. So both these are important for me. I need fluidity. I need my time off. I need to take off in 3 other directions while doing justice to work also. So what I do is I usually keep the most important productive and creative, that's important, work of even editing for the morning, for the first half of the day. And I finish that by lunch. So I start by 7, and in about 5 hours of work, I think I put in a lot of work in 5 hours. So wo mera ho gaya. So that's my best work on the document. The rest of the day, I actually take a nap in the afternoon. Yeah, I can afford to do that. And then I keep the evenings for other transactional work. So which is a little bit of social media, a little bit of communication, communicating with clients and prospects, so keeping those conversations going, and raising an invoice and sending that, all those associated things. So my best time I figured out is in the morning. So I put that, for the best of my work. The rest of the work is in the afternoon. I also call it a day by 7:30. Beyond 7:30, I do not work. And my Sundays are sacrosanct. Sundays, I do not work. So I can't say that I have the whole weekend, but because I have free times and other days of the week, and you and I can afford to do that, we do have that bit of flexibility. I don't mind working all through Saturdays, and Saturdays can be long days for me too. It doesn't matter, but Sundays are sacrosanct. So overall, over a 7-day period, kahin na kahin to wo balance aa hi jata hai. So that's my perspective. That's how, and I'm at peace with this. Yeah, I've been doing this for 5 years now. So this kind of schedule, I'm at peace. Hope that gives you some perspective, Shurit.
Yes. I wasn't really looking for specific pointers along how should I structure my day, my week by month. But let's say you're Ganesh Vanchishwar, right? And you're also Ganesh Vanchishwar Creative Services.
Sure.
Inside your own head, where is the line between the two? How do you go about describing the line as a human being, as a father, possibly as a husband, as a son, as a father, whatever else, and as a business service provider? Where do you draw the line? Where are the possible zones of conflict? Where are the possible synergies? How do you negotiate them? It's possible that I'm not articulating myself accurately.
No, I get a glimpse of this, but I think I'll just spend half a minute in telling you what's on my mind, and after that we could possibly take this offline or take this later. Yeah, because I think it requires a deeper discussion. That's my point.
Okay.
In my mind, there are no clashes. So I'm attempting this to the best of my ability, and I don't know if this is really what you mean, but I get a sense of the question. So in my mind, there are no clashes. There are only synergies. I am, as a professional, I am what as a person, right? So I think both of them are two sides of the same coin, or they go hand in hand. You could use any metaphor you want to use, but I think I am in my profession what I am as a person. So a lot of those qualities flow into this. A lot of those approaches, a lot of those perspectives, thinking, everything, habits, all of that flow into this. So in terms of my identity, if you were to ask me if there's a fundamental clash somewhere and I need to keep reconciling that, I haven't felt the need to do that at all. Absolutely not.
Just sort of, if I may jump in and answer that question, I think of it not as conflicting identities, but conflicting goals, right? You have your revenue goals on one side and you have your personal goals on one side. And the problem is you have only finite amount of time. So I think one thing that it's an idea that I'm playing with this year, I can't say I've done it very well, is to define your upper limit. Like you set your target at the end of the year saying, this is how much money I want to make this year, right? And you have a vague idea of on a monthly basis, on a quarterly basis, how close you are to sort of hitting that target. And if you are already on track to hitting the target and you're getting this really large project that you know is going to take 20% more of your time, then you need to ask yourself, what are my priorities? Which priority is going to take precedence? And very often, if you're already hitting a financial target, then do you really want to sacrifice 20% of your personal time to get the 20% more revenue or whatever, how much ever more revenue, right? Sort of setting an upper limit to your goal. Like a lot of people have the lower limit, like that is something that constantly keeps us up at night. But setting an upper limit is also very useful because
a point where you will say enough for now.
Yeah. And because there's always a thing within us, right? They're saying more. I can just do this, just get a little bit more money, get a little bit more revenue. To tell that part of yourself, the business part of yourself, like, okay, please keep quiet right now. Let's focus on other aspects of our life also. So to when you set a limit on that need for more, it becomes easier to shift your focus to other priorities.
Tell us how that pans out for you.
Thought about the same thing, like what you're saying, upper limit, Chitra. Mm-hmm. For me, the upper limit is already set. Upper limit. Yeah. I have my whatever targets, but then it is a very rigorous target, and I do have to juggle a lot of things. I've always been working from home, but the home, your work-life balance or whatever. I draw a line and I say this is my time, whether it is to do with my taking care of my health or my family or whatever. I do not work beyond that. And like Ganesh said, Sundays, I don't touch the laptop. It's just, today I've touched the laptop. So Sunday is mine. So it's very right where you say that you have to have that upper limit and, beyond that, you really shouldn't compromise.
Some cutoff. Yes.
Some cutoff should be there. It is so juggling is very, it is a tactic, but everyone should do it, I think. Give yourself time and, balance it out well.
Yes, excellent. Cora has sent in a question. Okay, that's more a statement. She says, I love the way you speak about your support system addressed at Chitra. But she follows that up with a question. What type of clients do you handle? Is it fiction or non-fiction? I think we've got that idea, Cora. She spoke about it. I think these are some early questions that I'm reading now. Vivek has a question. Would you ask Chitra this? It's hard to work out the line between. That's the same.
Ganesh, that's the same question.
Question to Ujjwala. How do you estimate the amount of editing work required for a document before committing a date to publishers and authors?
Yeah, we do have this, kind of target. If it is a level 1 editing, then you given a number of, you can do a number of set number of pages on a day, let's say about 50 pages or whatever. I'm just putting a number to it. If it is a level 2, then let's say 35, 40. Then if it is level 3, then it is, much lesser. So based on that, when I do my evaluation of the manuscript, looking at the number of pages, we decide on how many days this book can be, we can do this book in how many days. And also there's a cushion for the QC. So the editing part is one part of it. Then there's a couple of days, whatever, for QC. And then there's a buffer as well.
Buffer, yes.
Yeah. So based on that, we give our dates. At the minute we receive a project from the publisher, we do this, internal homework, and we communicate our dates to the P, and if the P is fine, that's the publishing editor, P is fine, then we also, that's communicated to the author, and then that becomes cast in stone. So there's a lot of work that goes before we actually commit that date.
Right.
Our research we have done and how much can be done on what kind of books, what level of editing. based on that, we draw our schedules. So that is
So it's based on experience. It's judgment based on experience.
and maybe legacy. I mean, it's been coming from
That's what. Yes.
whatever. Yes. So
Right.
we know that okay, these many pages can be done. But also, having said that, there's also the copy editor's limitation. Sometimes there are some people who really read very fast and
Of course. Yes.
just like that. Some who can't. So that's where my work, my job becomes a little bit complicated. We have to see that whether this copy editor can. And right now, only she is available. But can she handle this book? Then I'll say a little more time because she may not be able to do it in this much time. So that is that is the judgment that I do at the MS evaluation stage. Okay, so based on that, we take a decision and we convey our schedules to the stakeholders.
All right, lovely. So there are some nice comments coming. Charu is saying, thank you for generously sharing your insights and practical tips based on experience. Excellent session. Murali says, useful session, inspiring. Thank you very much. Deepali has a question. Yeah. So any thoughts from anyone on how editing might change in future considering the advent of technology? It could be something simple like Grammarly or something more complex involving machine learning and artificial intelligence. Ujjwala or Chitra, you want to take this?
I take that. I'm like I said, I'm a electronics engineer, and I started my career in a industry which automated a lot of things. We had to write software to this one, and I've seen I love gadgets, I love technology, and as I'm seeing how it has grown, how artificial intelligence, we're talking about that. Yes, to some extent, maybe your work could be simplified, but somewhere I feel that the human touch, where you read something and try to understand and what the author is trying to say, it cannot be, replaced by machines. So human beings will be needed. So our jobs are not going anywhere in the near future. That I'm very sure of. Maybe it can be simplified, like whatever you say, perfectly. Or I have not used any of this, but maybe it will be simplified. But we are there. We're here to stay. So that's my firm belief.
Chitra, how does it look from your corner of the world?
I think it's a question of when, if not, it's not about if. Like, it's going to happen, it's coming. And I think what we're going to see is really a slow erosion. Actually, we don't know about how slow or fast it is because technology sometimes happens slowly, sometimes happens in big jumps. So I think it's not going to be a situation where we wake up one day and the newspaper says all editors are fired. I don't think it's one of those situations. I think it's going to be that these tools are going to get better and better at what they do. And eventually, companies will require fewer editors because the tools are going to be taking care of a lot of the mechanical part of the editing, and you would probably require editors for the language part of it, right? And at one point of time in the distant future, there might be a giant leap where we do have a truly creative AI, which can mimic human language. And at that point, we will all be redundant, but probably most people on Earth, their jobs will be redundant. So there would be much bigger problems at that point. But it's far in the
bleak. That's a very bleak.
I don't think this will happen much in fiction editing. It may happen in academic editing and but in fiction editing, you still have to have the human element. I mean, you can't expect an AI to really understand the story and to understand a plot, the character, all that kind of thing.
Yes,
so this can happen a lot, I think, in consistency in academic. I don't see it happening too much in fiction.
Yeah. So yes.
I think a lot of
I don't see
it's
because when you come to fiction, there's a lot more creative editing happening than pure mechanical edits happening. Yeah. So maybe things like Grammarly and Perfected might work more for academic, but it doesn't work much for fiction.
So Cora, here's the thing, linked to what Chitra said, one point of what she said, someone I know, I'm forgetting the name of the company, she runs a company which it's completely web-based, obviously, and obviously they use a lot of AI. But you know what it does? It is targeted at readers. It's meant to benefit readers, authors, writers, and it reads the emotional tone and content of the tone and tenor. Okay, the emotional tone and tenor of a piece of content, textual content. All right, and it plays it back to you, and it tells you, therefore, with respect to what kind of document you're going to bring out and what your goals are, readership goals are, where this goes off. So where are you on track and where are you off track? So it's come to a point where there is a company and she's commercially viable, right?
Yeah, but Ganesh.
Yeah, sorry. I'm losing you, Cora.
Yeah, Cora, your voice is breaking.
Yeah, that's machine voice, very ironically.
Using it.
No, I'm just the beginning of my answer. No, I'm not saying therefore it's doomsday for us and all of that. No, I'm not saying that at all.
It can't be doomsday. It will take a long time.
Yes, it will. Also, I think organizations working, like you also said, academic and scholarly publishing and a lot of non-fiction publishing, where there are organizations involved in publishing decisions, I think they will invest in this first. And independent authors are going to be far, far beyond in picking this up and, or expecting the editorial process to have any of this. That's one. Number two is, like you said, it's more academic, scientific research versus fiction for sure. And ultimately, however, I do agree with Chitra saying I think it's going to be a gradual process. Hopefully, we would have finished,
hopefully, we'll all be retiring and enjoying life by then.
Yeah, taken down my shingle and hung up by then, all of us. But I think that's also at some point of time inevitable. Because for me, see, this is 2 years ago, this thing about any machine coming in to read emotional content, which is the way you and I emote to content, right? If it's able to gauge that, that's a big step. And I'm seeing other big steps.
That, definitely. Yeah. The moment it can gauge the emotional thing, the tone, all that kind of thing,
correct,
then that's a big step.
Yes, ma'am.
But as long as it's just checking for spellings and, whether words should be hyphenated or capitalized or whether it should be level 1 heading or all that kind of boring stuff, well, then we are happy as long as it doesn't do that.
Yes.
Ganesh, can I have a moment, please?
Please, yes.
So to branch off where Chitra ended, all of this is happening right now as we talk. Okay. There's a journal that publishes poetry written by artificial intelligence. There's a journal that publishes literature written by artificial intelligence. The email program that you're referring to is probably Crystal Knows. It has been around for 3 years. Looks at the content of your email and suggests alternative ways of phrasing it. There's an AI called Trinka.ai, which is being developed in India by a publishing company. I forget the name. It's being used by publishers right now.
Okay.
Right now. Okay.
Right.
As Guruvraj said the other day, a few months back, anything that can be automated within the packaging industry has been automated. You have human beings for things that cannot be automated cheaply and efficiently at this moment.
Yeah.
Now, these processes have not been rolled out to individuals because individuals can't pay for it.
Yes.
So Edifix, for instance, already automates to a very large extent the issue of referencing. It costs $40 a month. Not everybody in India can pay $40 a month.
Yeah.
The other thing is that it's a question of pattern recognition, ultimately. Okay, you could beat Gary Kasparov at chess. You could beat Lee Sedol at Go. You can figure out patterns. Question is enough money being invested in research into AI for writing and editing, and is it being considered cost-effective in the foreseeable future?
One hopes not.
If this is being done now, then you will need editors in a supervisory role. Always
Yes. True.
Kiosks in Japan operated by robots. I just saw a few days back an entire factory somewhere in the US operated by robots. Their entire drone operation system is done out of some small town somewhere in the US. So all of this is happening and will happen. We don't know when, as Chitra pointed out. But there is no if about it. The only if is, can they do it cost effectively enough in the foreseeable future for us to be credited? Okay. So, this check out Crystal Knows. This is probably what you were talking to. It's an AI plugin to your Gmail. Okay. And it will tell you what sort of tone you're taking in an email to me. So it will process all of the emails from shurit@shuritdas.com to ganesh@gmail.com, and it will say that Shurit is very brief, laconic, to the point, doesn't waste his time on hellos and goodbyes and how have you been. So would you prefer to take that sort of tone with him instead of saying, and how was your weekend?
Absolutely.
So this is a reality. This is something you can pull up a pen right now and log into and check for yourself right now. So, all of this is happening. So this is just something I wanted to say.
Cool. Sure. Thanks, Shurit. Deepali has a question. Chitralekha, how do you choose your teammates? Is it the typical test or is it acquaintances? If I have any flavor of Chitra, I do not think it's a typical test. I can't imagine her just giving that and saying yes or no. But do you want to spend a moment or two more, Chitra, on that?
Yeah, so most of our recruitment pipeline is handled by Daita. So if you want to work for us, I would suggest writing to her directly. That's daita@thecleancopy.com. Daita, if you're still online, you could plug in your email ID into the chat box. And what we have is fairly simple. It's a 3-step process. There's a Google form that you need to fill up with some basic questions. And then there's a sample. And then there's a phone call. And based on that, we'll decide whether you're a good fit or not for the Clean Copy.
So what are some of those parameters that you look for beyond that test, of course? What do you look for in a person you want to work with?
There is nothing beyond a test. The test is everything. But I mean, the test is a chunk of it, but also it's about availability, whether someone can work autonomously, technology friendliness. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Shravanti has a question. How does one become a member of ICF? Is there a website where I can read about it? So Vivek has answered that on chat, and I think Shravanti, you've picked it up. Okay, great. That was an enlightening session, says Arundhati. Thank you. And then we need to end in the next 5 minutes, says Principal Saab. Sir, yeah.
Was it more than 5 minutes ago?
I know, that was 15 minutes ago, I suppose. Yeah, but I think that's it. I've scrolled through all the questions. If there is anything else, otherwise we'll wrap up. And thank you, Chitra and Ujjwala. You've been super to talk
Thank
to.
you. It was an excellent session.
Pleasure.
I enjoyed it myself. So thanks, Chitra. Thanks, Ganesh.
You're welcome, ma'am. Thanks, Chitra. Lovely having you also.
Excellent. Also,
It was a very nice session this time.
Thank you.
Interesting.
Oh my goodness. This time, bol diya usne.
Someone pinged me privately, so I'm just telling that person that please email me directly at chitra@thecleancopy.com, CHITRA@thecleancopy.com. Yeah, and then we can get back to. Yeah.
So we shall circle back to Vivek. And over to you, sir.
Thanks, Ganesh, for a very interesting session. And as Deepali has already mentioned, you were the best part of this session. So that's
amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for the excellent questions. They were very insightful.
because it's
You know how
I like your Makasam, Ganesh. Your expression is Makasam. Maybe.
Thanks
you for that.
Lekha, thanks Ujjwala, and all the best for your endeavors. Our next session will be at 9:30 a.m.
Oh my God.
It's
Morning session.
Yeah, it's on BELS certification. And John McDonald from Canada, who is on the board of directors for BELS, will be taking this session. So 9:30 a.m. might be early for us, but for him, it's going to be 10 p.m. at night.
This is next Saturday, is it?
Next Sunday.
Next Sunday.
And the next interview session will be on 11th of July. And the guest will be ICF member Ambika Arvind. She runs her own company, so that will be a one-to-one session. Today, because like it was an inaugural session,
Yes.
today we decided to have in-house inputs as well as inputs from freelance owners. But it was a great balancing act by Ganesh.
Thank you so much.
And thanks. Yes, Ganesh.
No, nothing. So I was just telling the gang. So I'll be seeing you again on the 11th, where I'll chat with Ambika. That should be another good session.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And the attendance was also very good. 49 is the number we reached. We might have crossed 50 also because people keep joining and leaving.
Right.
Thanks for that half century for the first session.
And thanks also Ujjwala and Chitra for openly, I think someone said this in the chat box, talking very freely. I think that makes a lot of difference, So
Yes.
really makes the session sparkle through.
Thank you. You made us feel
Thank
very
you.
comfortable, Ganesh.
Yes, very
Yeah.
very well done. Done interrogation, I would say.
Yeah.
So was that? So thankfully I
No,
didn't.
no, I was just kidding. That was nice.
No, I hope I didn't do any
Ganesh said
intrusive
no
editing.
for debate.
No.
He was like, okay, you guys have to answer.
Chalo then.
Okay,
Great, guys.
yeah.
See
Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thanks
See you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Have
you,
a nice
everyone.
day.
Yeah,
Yes.
Bye.
sure.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.